The billboard towered over Interstate 20 like a monument to everything I had once thought impossible. My face, unfiltered and unashamed, gazed down at passing traffic with the kind of confident smile that had taken me 3 years to perfect. The text beside my image read in bold letters, "Real beauty lives here. Authentic Skin Company." Below that, in smaller print, "Because perfect is just pretend." I pulled my rental car onto the shoulder and stepped out into the humid South Carolina morning, squinting up at the advertisement that had caused such a stir in my hometown. According to my mother's breathless phone calls, the billboard had been the talk of Acne for weeks. Some people called it inspiring. Others called it a direct attack on the Williams family cosmetics empire that had built half the town. Both groups were right. Standing there in the shadow of my own transformed face, I could see the exit for downtown Acne just ahead, the place where everything had begun, where I had learned the hardest lesson of my life, and where I was about to prove that some scars make you stronger instead of weaker. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw the billboard. "We need to talk. Connor." I smiled, deleted the message without responding, and got back in my car. After 3 years, Connor Williams was finally ready to have a conversation. Unfortunately for him, I was no longer the girl who waited around for his attention. The real story, the one that led me from a medicine cabinet full of expensive treatments to the face of a revolutionary beauty campaign, began with the kind of heartbreak that either destroys you or remakes you entirely. I chose to be remade. The first crack in my perfect life appeared on a Tuesday morning in March, though I wouldn't recognize it as the beginning of the end until much later. I was standing in Connor Williams' bathroom, applying the latest Williams Cosmetics concealer to a small blemish near my jawline, when he wrapped his arms around me from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder. "You don't need that stuff," he murmured into my ear, his reflection meeting mine in the mirror. "You're naturally flawless." At 22, I believed him. My skin had been clear since middle school, the kind of porcelain complexion that made other girls ask about my routine with barely concealed envy. In a town like Acne, where the Williams family had built their cosmetics fortune on the promise of perfection, being Connor's girlfriend meant being the unofficial face of their brand's aspirations. Sarah Elizabeth Montgomery, that's what my grandmother had named me, though everyone called me Sarah Beth, daughter of a high school English teacher and a hardware store manager, dating the heir to the Williams Cosmetics empire. It was the kind of fairy tale that small southern towns loved to celebrate, especially when the princess looked good in Instagram photos. Connor and I had been together since our sophomore year at the University of South Carolina, where he studied business and I majored in communications with dreams of working in public relations. We were the couple other students pointed to as relationship goals. He was tall, handsome, and came from money. I was pretty, sweet, and grateful for his attention. Our social media feeds were carefully curated collections of perfect moments, date nights at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Charleston, couples photos that could have been advertisements for the life his family's money could buy. "Today's the day," Connor said, straightening his tie in the mirror. "Dad's finally letting me present the new campaign strategy to the board." The Williams Cosmetics spring campaign was Connor's first real responsibility within the family business, and he had been working on it for months. The concept centered around effortless beauty, young, naturally gorgeous women using minimal makeup to enhance their God-given perfection. I had been his inspiration and his unofficial test model, trying products and offering feedback as he developed his vision. "You're going to be brilliant," I told him, meaning it. Connor might have been born into privilege, but he had genuine ideas about modernizing his family's brand for a younger demographic. He kissed my temple before heading toward the door. "Dinner tonight at the club to celebrate. Wear that blue dress I bought you, the one that photographs well." After he left, I stayed in his bathroom for a few more minutes, studying my reflection with the kind of clinical attention that had become second nature. My skin was indeed flawless that morning, smooth, even-toned, the kind of complexion that made expensive makeup seem redundant. The small blemish I had been concealing was already fading, barely visible under the Williams Cosmetics foundation that Connor always made sure I was wearing. I should have savored that moment, That last morning when my face was everything Connor valued about me. Instead, I was already thinking about the evening ahead, about the blue dress hanging in my closet, and how I would style my hair for the photos that would inevitably end up on social media. The irony wasn't lost on me, even then. I was dating a man whose family fortune was built on selling solutions to skin problems I had never experienced, living in a world where my value was measured by my ability to look effortlessly perfect at all times. But stress has a way of revealing the flaws in seemingly perfect systems, and my final semester at USC was about to test every assumption I had made about my life, my relationship, and my own resilience. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks later, during the most stressful period of my college career. Senior thesis deadlines, job interview preparations, and graduation planning had compressed into a perfect storm of anxiety that kept me awake until 3 a.m. most nights. I was surviving on coffee, energy bars, and the kind of determination that comes from knowing your future depends on performing flawlessly under pressure. That's when my skin decided to betray me. It started small, a cluster of bumps along my jawline that I initially dismissed as stress-related and temporary. But instead of disappearing after a good night's sleep and some expensive spot treatment, the breakout spread. What began as a few minor blemishes evolved into angry, inflamed cysts that no amount of concealer could completely hide. Connor noticed immediately, of course. He had been trained since childhood to assess skin quality with the critical eye of someone whose family fortune depended on selling perfection. His reaction was swift and devastating in its casual cruelty. "Maybe you should see a dermatologist," he suggested after I spent 20 minutes trying to camouflage the worst of the breakout before a dinner with his parents. "This isn't really your look." The comment was delivered with the kind of thoughtless honesty that revealed exactly what Connor found valuable about our relationship. I wasn't his girlfriend who happened to have beautiful skin. I was beautiful skin that happened to belong to his girlfriend. The distinction mattered more than I had ever realized. Over the next month, as my acne worsened instead of improving, Connor's behavior shifted in ways that were subtle but unmistakable. He stopped suggesting we take photos together. He began making excuses for why I couldn't attend family events or business functions. Most tellingly, he started referring to my skin condition as temporary, as if willing it to be a brief inconvenience rather than acknowledging it as my new reality. "The stress is just getting to you," he would say, scrolling through old photos of us on his phone. "Once graduation is over and things calm down, you'll be back to normal." Normal. As if the way I looked now was abnormal, unacceptable, something to be endured rather than embraced. The dermatologist visits became a weekly ritual that drained my modest savings and filled my medicine cabinet with treatments that promised miracles and delivered irritation. Prescription retinoids that made my skin red and flaky. Antibiotics that upset my stomach without clearing my complexion. Expensive Williams Cosmetics products that Connor brought home with increasing frequency, each one supposedly formulated for problem skin. "Mom thinks you should try the new clarifying line," he would say, setting another bag of products on my bathroom counter. "She said to tell you not to worry about the cost. We can expense it as product testing." The charity of his family's skincare donations felt more humiliating than helpful, especially when nothing seemed to work. If anything, the aggressive treatments appeared to make my skin angrier, more inflamed, as if my face was rebelling against the very products designed to fix it. But the real breaking point came not from my skin's refusal to cooperate, but from Connor's inability to see me as anything more than a collection of flaws that needed to be corrected. The Williams Cosmetics Spring campaign launched in April with a series of print advertisements and social media posts featuring young women with flawless complexions using the company's products to achieve natural radiance. The tagline was "Born Beautiful, Made Perfect," and the models all looked remarkably similar, blonde, blue-eyed, and blessed with the kind of genetic lottery that made expensive cosmetics seem like an afterthought. I should have been featured in those advertisements. For months, Connor had taken photos of me testing products, trying different looks, embodying the effortless beauty his campaign was designed to sell. But when the final advertisements appeared in magazines and on billboards throughout South Carolina, my face was nowhere to be found. Instead, Connor had hired professional models whose skin required no digital retouching, no strategic lighting, no careful angles to hide imperfections that might detract from the brand's promise of perfection. "It's nothing personal," he explained when I confronted him about my absence from his campaign. The marketing team felt we needed a more consistent look across all the materials. More consistent, more predictable, more perfect. That night, I stood in my apartment bathroom and really looked at myself for the first time in months. The woman in the mirror had angry red bumps scattered across her cheeks and forehead. Her skin was uneven, inflamed, marked by the kind of normal human imperfection that Connor's family business had taught him to see as a problem to be solved rather than a reality to be accepted. But beneath the acne, beneath the frustration and self-doubt, I saw something else. A person whose worth had never actually depended on her appearance, even though she had been convinced otherwise by a man who valued surfaces over substance. The revelation should have been liberating. Instead, it was terrifying, because it meant confronting the possibility that the life I had built with Connor was founded on conditions I could no longer meet. 2 weeks later, at a graduation party that should have been a celebration of our future together, Connor made it clear that he had already decided there was no future to celebrate. The party was being held at the Williams family estate, a sprawling antebellum mansion on the outskirts of Acne that had been featured in Southern Living magazine twice. Connor's mother, Patricia Williams, had insisted on hosting a graduation celebration for the kids, which in her vocabulary meant the children of Acne's most prominent families. The guest list read like a who's who of South Carolina society, and the event was being photographed for the Williams Cosmetics social media accounts. I spent 2 hours getting ready, layering concealer and foundation with the precision of a Renaissance painter. The blue dress Connor had bought me hung perfectly, and my hair fell in soft waves that had taken 40 minutes to achieve. From a distance, in the right lighting, I could almost pass for the girl Connor had fallen in love with. But Instagram posts required close-ups, and close-ups revealed everything I was trying to hide. "Sarah Beth, honey, you look lovely," Patricia Williams said when I arrived, though her eyes lingered on my face with the kind of assessment that made my skin feel like a failed science experiment. "How are you feeling? Connor mentioned you've been under the weather." Under the weather. It was the euphemism Connor's family had adopted for my acne, as if clear skin was a matter of temporary illness rather than genetics, stress, and hormones beyond my control. The party was everything Connor's social media followers expected. Beautiful people wearing expensive clothes, eating catered food, and posing for photos that would reinforce the Williams family's carefully constructed image of success and perfection. I tried to blend into the background, nursing a glass of wine and avoiding the professional photographer Connor's mother had hired to document the evening. But Connor had other plans. "Sarah Beth," he called out from across the terrace, his voice carrying the forced enthusiasm of someone performing happiness for an audience. "Come meet Ashley. She's starting at Williams Cosmetics next month as our new social media manager." Ashley Chun was everything I used to be: young, beautiful, and blessed with the kind of naturally flawless skin that made expensive makeup seem redundant. She was also ambitious, charming, and clearly smitten with Connor's combination of good looks and family money. "Connor's told me so much about you," Ashley said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I love following your Instagram. You guys are such goals." The past tense wasn't lost on me. Our Instagram had been dormant for weeks, ever since Connor stopped wanting to document our relationship publicly. "Ashley's going to be revolutionizing our digital strategy," Connor explained, his arms settling around my waist with the kind of possessive gesture that would have thrilled me 6 months earlier. "She has amazing ideas about authentic storytelling and real beauty." Real beauty. Coming from a man who had spent the last 2 months treating my actual skin like a temporary inconvenience, the phrase felt like a slap disguised as a compliment. The conversation continued around me, but I found myself studying Ashley's face with the kind of clinical attention that had become second nature. Her skin was indeed perfect, smooth, even-toned, the kind of complexion that required no digital retouching. She was what I used to be, what Connor still needed me to be, what I could no longer provide. "We should get some photos," Connor announced, producing his phone with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment. "The lighting out here is incredible." What followed was a masterclass in exclusion disguised as inclusion. Connor positioned Ashley and me on either side of him, then spent several minutes adjusting angles and lighting to find shots where my skin looked acceptable. Each retake felt like a small rejection, a reminder that my presence now required management rather than celebration. Actually, Connor said after reviewing the photos, maybe we should try some individual shots. Ashley, you don't mind, do you? I watched from the sidelines as Connor photographed his new social media manager, directing her poses with the kind of attention he used to give me. Ashley was a natural model, comfortable in front of the camera, intuitive about angles, blessed with the kind of photogenic features that required no special consideration. Your turn, Connor said finally, though his enthusiasm had noticeably diminished. The photos he took of me were technically competent, but lacked the warmth and spontaneity of his session with Ashley. I could see him thinking through each shot, calculating how much editing would be required to make my skin look acceptable for public consumption. Beautiful, he said, though we both knew it wasn't true. The real devastation came later that evening, after most of the guests had gone home and Connor had walked me to my car. We stood in the circular driveway of his family's estate, surrounded by the kind of old-money elegance that had always made me feel like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Sarah Beth, Connor began, and something in his tone made my stomach clench with dread. We need to talk about our future. The conversation that followed was delivered with the kind of gentle cruelty that Southern men learned from childhood, polite, considerate, and absolutely devastating in its implications. Connor explained that he had been thinking about our relationship, about where we were headed, about the challenges we might face as we started our careers. He talked about timing and compatibility and the importance of being realistic about long-term goals. He used phrases like growing apart and different paths and wanting what's best for both of us. What he didn't say, what hung between us like humidity in the summer air, was that my acne had transformed me from an asset into a liability. The girl he had fallen in love with had been beautiful in a way that complemented his family's brand. The woman standing in front of him was marked by the kind of normal human imperfection that his business was designed to eliminate. I'll always care about you, Connor finished, his hand reaching out to touch my cheek with the kind of tender gesture that might have been sweet if it wasn't goodbye. You're going to find someone who loves you exactly as you are. The implication was clear. He was not that someone. I drove home through the quiet streets of Acne with tears streaming down my face, past the Williams Cosmetics billboards that promised perfect skin to anyone willing to pay for it, past the country club where Connor and I had attended dozens of social events, past the boutiques where he had bought me clothes that photographed well. In my apartment, I sat on my bathroom floor and looked through our Instagram photos, trying to find the moment when everything had started to change. There I was 6 months ago, glowing with happiness and clear skin. There we were at Christmas, my complexion smooth and even in the warm light of his family's tree. There was Valentine's Day, my face turned toward his with the kind of adoring expression that now seemed naive. The girl in those photos had believed that love was unconditional, that real relationships survived temporary imperfections, that her worth extended beyond her appearance. She had been wrong about all of it. But as I sat there surrounded by the evidence of our failed relationship, I realized something that would change everything about my future. Connor's rejection wasn't actually about my skin. It was about his inability to see value in anything that didn't serve his image, his brand, his carefully constructed idea of success. My acne hadn't destroyed our relationship. It had simply revealed what our relationship had always been. The weeks following my breakup with Connor passed in a haze of humiliation and self-imposed isolation. Graduation came and went without celebration. I walked across the stage to receive my diploma with my face hidden behind layers of makeup, then drove straight back to Acne without attending any of the parties or gatherings that marked the end of our college years. My childhood bedroom felt like a time capsule from a more innocent era. High school cheerleading trophies shared shelf space with photos of Connor and me from better days. My prom queen crown sat in its original box, a reminder of the time when my appearance had been something to celebrate rather than hide. My mother, Rebecca Montgomery, tried her best to be supportive without understanding the full scope of my devastation. She had always been proud of my relationship with Connor, seeing it as evidence that her daughter had risen above their middle-class circumstances to claim a place among Acne's elite families. "Honey, you know there are new treatments coming out all the time," she said one morning over coffee, her voice carrying the forced optimism that parents use when they don't know how to fix their children's problems. Maybe Dr. Patterson could refer you to a specialist in Atlanta or Charleston. Dr. Patterson had been our family physician since I was 12, but his expertise with teenage acne hadn't prepared him for the severity of my adult breakout. The treatments he prescribed were variations on themes I had already tried: stronger antibiotics, more aggressive topical medications, dietary changes that made no discernible difference. "I'm fine, Mama," I would tell her, though we both knew it wasn't true. The job market for recent college graduates in Acne was limited under the best of circumstances. But my self-confidence had been so thoroughly destroyed that I couldn't imagine interviewing for positions that required any kind of public interaction. Instead, I took a part-time job at the Acne County Historical Society, cataloging archives and organizing events that allowed me to work mostly behind the scenes. My supervisor, Margaret Foster, was a woman in her 60s who had never married and seemed to understand something about the weight of other people's expectations without needing detailed explanations. "You're good with the computer systems," she observed after I had been working there for a month. "Have you thought about freelance work? Writing, maybe, or social media management? The kind of thing you can do from anywhere." The suggestion was practical and well-intentioned, but it also felt like confirmation that I was now the kind of person who needed to hide behind screens rather than interact with the world directly. Connor's presence in Aiken made my isolation more complicated. The Williams family owned half the businesses downtown, sponsored most of the major social events, and maintained the kind of prominence that made avoiding them entirely impossible. I would catch glimpses of him at restaurants or social gatherings, usually accompanied by Ashley Chin, who had indeed revolutionized Williams Cosmetics' digital presence with her combination of business acumen and photogenic features. Their relationship progressed with the kind of public documentation that had once characterized Connor's relationship with me. Instagram posts from romantic weekends in Charleston. Professional photos from Williams Cosmetics events where Ashley served as both employee and unofficial spokesmodel. Engagement announcements that made the society pages of newspapers throughout South Carolina. Watching Connor's life move forward without me was painful, but what hurt more was realizing how easily I had been replaced. Ashley wasn't just Connor's new girlfriend. She was the improved version of what I had been, equipped with better skin and fewer complications. But Margaret Foster's suggestion about freelance work planted a seed that would eventually grow into something I hadn't expected: purpose. I started small, writing blog posts for local businesses that needed web content but couldn't afford professional marketing agencies. The work was anonymous and solitary, exactly what I needed while my confidence slowly rebuilt itself. But as I researched topics for clients, I began encountering information that challenged everything I thought I knew about skincare, beauty standards, and the cosmetics industry. Scientific studies revealed that expensive skincare products were often no more effective than drugstore alternatives. Dermatology journals discussed the psychological impact of acne with the kind of clinical recognition that validated my own experience. Most surprising of all, I discovered that the perfect skin featured in cosmetics advertisements was almost always digitally enhanced, even when the models started with naturally clear complexions. The Williams Cosmetics empire that had shaped my understanding of beauty was built on selling solutions to problems they had helped create, promising perfection that existed only in carefully edited photographs. That revelation led me to something I hadn't planned: honesty about my own experience. I started writing about acne not as a problem to be solved, but as a normal human condition that affected millions of people who had been convinced they were somehow defective. I wrote about the financial burden of treatments that promised miracles and delivered disappointment. I wrote about the social isolation that came from living in a culture that treated clear skin as a moral virtue rather than a genetic lottery. The blog I created was called Real Talk, Southern Belle Edition, and I published it under the pseudonym Scarlet Truth, a name that nodded to my Georgia roots while maintaining the anonymity I still needed. The content was personal but not confessional, informed but not preachy, honest in ways that I had never allowed myself to be in real life. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from readers who had never seen their own skin struggles reflected in media that claimed to celebrate natural beauty, while only featuring naturally perfect people. Messages arrived from women who had spent thousands of dollars on treatments that left them financially drained and emotionally defeated. Letters came from teenagers whose self-worth had been destroyed by acne that their parents treated as a character flaw rather than a medical condition. Finally, someone talking about what it's actually like to live with cystic acne, wrote one reader from Colombia. Not just the journey to clear skin, but the reality of maybe never getting there. Your post about expensive treatments hit home so hard, commented another from Charleston. I spent my entire savings on a dermatologist who made me feel like my skin was my fault. 6 months after I started Real Talk, the blog had attracted 30,000 regular readers and the attention of skincare companies that were beginning to recognize the market demand for authenticity over aspiration. But it was a phone call on a humid Tuesday afternoon that would change everything about my understanding of what was possible. Scarlet Truth. The woman's voice was professional but warm, with an accent I couldn't quite place. This is Dr. Amanda Rodriguez from Authentic Skin Company. I've been following your blog for months, and I think we should talk. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez was everything the traditional beauty industry wasn't. A dermatologist turned entrepreneur who had built her company around the radical idea that skin didn't need to be perfect to be beautiful. Authentic Skin Company had started as a small operation in Austin, Texas, but was rapidly expanding across the South with products designed to support rather than hide natural skin texture. Scarlett, Dr. Rodriguez said during our first phone conversation, what you're doing with your blog is exactly the kind of authentic voice our industry needs. Your readers trust you because you're telling the truth about experiences that most brands pretend don't exist. The conversation lasted 2 hours and covered everything from the psychological impact of acne medications to the marketing strategies that had convinced millions of people their natural skin was unacceptable. Dr. Rodriguez spoke with the kind of passion that comes from genuine expertise rather than corporate talking points. We're planning something revolutionary, she explained. A campaign that features real people with real skin concerns. Not before and after transformations, but celebration of skin as it actually exists. Would you be interested in being part of something like that? The offer was both thrilling and terrifying. After months of hiding behind a pseudonym, the idea of showing my face publicly seemed impossible. But Dr. Rodriguez wasn't asking me to hide my acne or pretend it didn't exist. She was asking me to use it as evidence that beauty came in forms the traditional industry had refused to acknowledge. I'd need to think about it, I told her, though my heart was already racing with possibilities I hadn't allowed myself to imagine. Of course, but Scarlett, or should I say Sarah Beth, real change requires real faces. Your story could help millions of people who have been made to feel invisible by beauty standards that exclude them. The fact that she knew my real name was startling, but not surprising. Anonymous bloggers who attracted significant audiences rarely stayed anonymous for long, especially when their content challenged established industries. That night, I called my best friend from college, Ashley Watson, not to be confused with Connor's Ashley, though the similarity in names had always amused me. Ashley Watson was a journalism major who had moved to Atlanta after graduation and was working for a public relations firm that specialized in healthcare companies. Sarah Beth Montgomery, she said when she heard my voice. I was wondering when you were going to surface. I've been reading Real Talk for months. It's brilliant work. The revelation that my best friend had been following my blog without knowing I was the author felt like vindication and exposure in equal measure. How did you know it was me? Honey, you've been talking about Connor Williams and the Williams Cosmetics empire in exactly that tone of voice since sophomore year. Plus, Southern Belle Edition. You're not exactly subtle. Ashley's recognition of my voice in the blog post was both embarrassing and liberating. If she could identify me, others probably could too, which meant my anonymity was already more fictional than real. There's something else. I told her about Dr. Rodriguez's offer, about the possibility of becoming the face of a campaign that challenged everything Connor's family business represented. Sarah Beth, Ashley said after I finished explaining the opportunity, this isn't just about modeling or marketing. This is about using your platform to change how people think about beauty and self-worth. You'd be crazy not to do it. But the decision wasn't simply about professional opportunity. It was about choosing between the safety of anonymity and the risk of public vulnerability. Accepting Dr. Rodriguez's offer would mean revealing my face, my story, and my connection to Connor Williams in ways that would make hiding impossible. The answer came to me 3 days later, while I was walking through downtown Acne and past a billboard advertising Williams Cosmetics' latest campaign. The tagline read, "Flawless is the new beautiful," and the model featured was Ashley Chin, her perfect skin glowing with the kind of airbrushed perfection that existed only in professional photography. Standing there in the shadow of that billboard, I realized that Connor's Ashley represented everything I had been taught to aspire to: conventional beauty, professional success, romantic happiness that depended on meeting impossible standards. But my own Ashley, my friend who had recognized my voice in anonymous blog posts, had showed me something different: the possibility of being known and valued for who I actually was rather than who I pretended to be. I called Dr. Rodriguez that afternoon and accepted her offer. The Real Beauty Lives Here campaign launched with a photo shoot in Charleston that felt like therapy disguised as work. Instead of hiding my acne scars behind layers of makeup, the photographers highlighted them as evidence of a real human face that had lived through something difficult and survived. "This is what actual skin looks like," Dr. Rodriguez explained to the photography team. "Sarah Beth isn't trying to be perfect. She's trying to be honest. That's what makes her beautiful." The photos they took were unlike anything I had ever seen in beauty advertisements. My face was shown in natural light, without digital retouching, marked by the kind of normal human imperfection that Connor's industry had taught me to hide. But instead of looking damaged or flawed, I looked real in ways that perfect models never could. The campaign's centerpiece was a billboard that would be placed along Interstate 20, visible to everyone traveling between Columbia and Augusta. My face, unfiltered and unashamed, would gaze down at passing traffic with text that read, "Real Beauty Lives Here, Authentic Skin Company." Because perfect is just pretend. The billboard went live on a Monday morning in October, exactly 18 months after Connor had broken up with me in his family's driveway. By Tuesday afternoon, it had been photographed, shared on social media, and discussed in news outlets throughout South Carolina. The response was immediate and polarizing. Supporters praised the campaign's authenticity and its challenge to traditional beauty standards. Critics called it an attack on aspiration and self-improvement. Everyone agreed it was impossible to ignore. Williams Cosmetics' stock price dropped 8% in the first week. Connor's call came on Thursday evening, while I was reviewing media coverage of the campaign at my desk in the Historical Society office. "Sarah Beth," he said, and I could hear something like desperation in his voice. "We need to talk." The conversation that followed was everything I might have wanted 18 months earlier: Connor admitting he had made a mistake, expressing regret about how our relationship had ended, suggesting that we could find a way to work together again. "You're successful now," he said, as if success was something that had happened to me rather than something I had built through hard work and authentic voice. "We could be a power couple again. Think about the influence we could have together." But sitting in that office, surrounded by evidence of the life I had built from honesty rather than aspiration, I realized I didn't want to go backward to a relationship founded on conditions I could no longer meet. "Connor," I said gently, "you didn't love me when we were together. You loved what I looked like, what I represented for your image. That's not the same thing." The silence that followed was filled with everything he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge about the superficial nature of our former relationship. "This campaign," he said finally, "it's revenge, isn't it? You're trying to destroy my family's business because I hurt you." The accusation revealed so much about Connor's worldview, his assumption that my choices were reactions to him rather than expressions of my own values, his inability to see beyond the narrow scope of his own experience. "Connor," I said, "this isn't about you at all. This is about building something that includes people who have been left out of traditional beauty standards. If that threatens your business model, maybe your business model needed to be threatened." I hung up before he could respond, then sat for a moment in the quiet office, processing the conversation that had just ended my last connection to the life I used to want. 3 months later, the Real Beauty Lives Here campaign had expanded to include billboards in 6 states, a social media presence that reached millions of people. and a product line that celebrated skin as it actually existed rather than as it might become with enough expensive intervention. More importantly, I had learned something that Connor might never understand, that real beauty, the kind that lasted beyond perfect lighting and careful angles, came from accepting yourself completely and building a life that honored that acceptance. My skin told a story now, not of failure or inadequacy, but of resilience and self-discovery. Every fading scar was evidence that I had survived something that tried to diminish me. Every clear day was a gift rather than an expectation. And when I looked in the mirror each morning, I saw something Connor had never been able to see, not a collection of flaws to be hidden or perfected, but a face that belonged to someone who had learned the difference between being loved for what she looked like and being loved for who she was. The notification on my phone came while I was reviewing final proofs for Authentic Skin Company's latest campaign, a series of portraits featuring women and men whose skin told stories of survival, resilience, and self-acceptance. The message was from a local news station in Colombia, asking for my comment on an announcement that had just broken. Williams Cosmetics was being acquired by a larger beauty conglomerate after years of declining market share and mounting pressure from brands that prioritized authenticity over aspiration. The family empire that had dominated South Carolina's beauty industry for 3 generations was being absorbed into a company that specialized in natural beauty solutions. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I felt sad for the Williams family and the hundreds of employees whose jobs would likely be eliminated in the restructuring. Connor's grandfather had built something meaningful in its time, even if that meaning had become obsolete in an era that valued honesty over perfection. My phone buzzed again with a text from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your success. You were right about everything, Connor." I read the message twice, then deleted it without responding. Connor Williams belonged to a chapter of my life that had ended years ago, when I learned the difference between being loved conditionally and being valued authentically. The life I had built since then was everything I had never known I wanted. Authentic Skin Company had grown into a national brand that celebrated diversity in ways that felt genuine rather than performative. My role had evolved from spokesperson to creative director, developing campaigns that featured real people whose skin challenged traditional beauty standards. But more than professional success, I had found something Connor had never been able to offer, a relationship built on genuine connection rather than mutual benefit. David Parker was a dermatologist I had met at a conference on the psychological impact of skin conditions. He was kind, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by the beauty industry's manufactured drama. More importantly, he loved my face exactly as it was, scarred, imperfect, and authentically mine. Our wedding photos, featured in a magazine spread about couples who challenged conventional beauty standards, showed 2 people who had learned to find happiness in accepting themselves rather than pursuing perfection. My skin was having a particularly good day when the pictures were taken, but David's expression would have been the same regardless. Standing in my office that afternoon, looking out at the billboards visible from my window, advertisements for authentic beauty that featured real faces telling true stories, I thought about the girl I had been 5 years earlier, the one who had believed her worth depended on her appearance, who had built her life around meeting conditions she could never consistently fulfill, who had allowed someone else's narrow definition of beauty to determine her value. That girl would have been amazed by the woman I had become, not because my skin was perfect now, it wasn't, but because I had learned to see beauty in places the cosmetics industry had taught me to ignore. The Acne Historical Society had offered me a permanent position as their digital archivist, allowing me to work remotely while maintaining my connection to the town that had shaped me. I drove through downtown regularly, past the Williams Cosmetics headquarters that now bore a for sale sign, past the country club where Connor and I had attended so many events that felt important at the time. Sometimes I would see people from our old social circle, classmates who had married within Acne's established families, friends who had built comfortable lives within the boundaries their parents had set for them. They were polite when our paths crossed, offering congratulations on my success with the kind of carefully modulated enthusiasm that suggested they weren't quite sure whether my transformation was inspiring or threatening. But the encounters that mattered most were with strangers who recognized me from the Authentic Skin Company campaigns. Young women who approached me in grocery stores to say that my billboard had helped them accept their own acne. Mothers who thanked me for showing their daughters that beauty existed in forms beyond magazine covers. Men who admitted that my story had helped them understand the pressure their girlfriends and wives face to maintain impossible standards. "You probably don't remember me," said a teenage girl who approached me outside the Aiken County Library one Saturday afternoon. "But I wrote to you 2 years ago when I was thinking about dropping out of school because of my skin." I did remember her letter, one of thousands I had received from people whose self-worth had been damaged by acne and the social isolation it created. She was a senior now, planning to study dermatology in college, her face still marked by scars that had become part of her story rather than obstacles to overcome. "I wanted you to know," she continued, "that seeing your face on that billboard changed how I thought about mine. Like, maybe I didn't need to hide until I was perfect." These conversations happened regularly now, reminders that authenticity had power beyond personal healing. By refusing to hide my imperfections, I had given others permission to embrace their own. The irony wasn't lost on me that Connor's cruelest rejection had become the foundation for my greatest success. His inability to see value beyond conventional beauty had freed me to discover forms of worth he could never understand. The relationship that had nearly destroyed my self-confidence had ultimately taught me that real love required seeing someone completely, flaws, scars, imperfections, and all. David understood this in ways Connor never could. When my skin had flare-ups, he would gently remind me to be patient with the healing process. When magazine photographers suggested digital retouching for our engagement photos, he had firmly declined, saying that my real face was the one he had fallen in love with. "Perfection is overrated anyway," he had told the photographer. "Sarah Beth's scars are part of her story, and her story is beautiful." Our wedding was featured in several publications, not because we were celebrities or members of prominent families, but because we represented something the beauty industry was slowly learning to embrace. The idea that authentic love thrived on acceptance rather than aspiration. The ceremony was held in Aiken's Hopelands Gardens, with guests whose diversity reflected the inclusive community we had built around shared values rather than social status. Ashley Watson served as my maid of honor. Dr. Rodriguez gave a reading about the courage required for authentic living, and Margaret Foster from the Historical Society surprised everyone by revealing she had been following Real Talk since its earliest days. Connor was not invited, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that he and Ashley Chin had divorced after 2 years of marriage that looked perfect in photographs but apparently lacked the substance to survive real-world challenges. He had moved to Atlanta to work for a marketing firm that specialized in luxury brands, leaving behind the family business he had once expected to inherit. I felt no satisfaction in his failures, just a kind of distant sadness for the limitations he had imposed on himself by measuring worth through such narrow criteria. The reception featured a toast from my father, who had initially been skeptical of my decision to build a career around celebrating imperfection but had come to understand its importance. Sarah Beth taught us that sometimes the things we think are breaking us are actually making us stronger, he said, raising his glass toward the gathered guests. She turned the worst experience of her life into a gift for millions of people who needed to hear that they were beautiful exactly as they were. Later that evening, as David and I drove through downtown Aiken past the billboards that featured my face, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain of Connor's rejection had been real and devastating, but it had also been necessary, forcing me to confront the difference between relationships built on conditions and those founded on genuine acceptance. My phone lit up with notifications from social media, where our wedding photos were being shared and celebrated by the community that had grown around Authentic Skin Company's message. Comments poured in from people whose own journeys towards self-acceptance had been influenced by campaigns that dared to feature real faces telling true stories. "Thank you for showing us that scars can be beautiful," wrote one follower. "Your wedding photos made me cry happy tears," commented another. "You both look so genuinely happy." "Goals," said a third. "This is what real love looks like." As we pulled into the driveway of our new home, a modest house on a quiet street where we could build a life based on shared values rather than social expectations, I realized that Connor had been right about one thing. I had indeed found someone who loved me exactly as I was. He just hadn't understood that he was never going to be that person. The woman looking back at me in our hallway mirror that night was scarred, imperfect, and authentically beautiful in ways that no amount of expensive makeup could have achieved. She had learned that real confidence came from accepting yourself completely rather than pursuing perfection relentlessly. Most importantly, she had discovered that the worst things that happen to us sometimes become the foundation for the best things we build, if we have the courage to transform our pain into purpose and our scars into stories that help others heal. Standing there in my wedding dress, surrounded by evidence of a life built on authenticity rather than aspiration, I smiled at my reflection and whispered the words that had become my personal motto: perfect is just pretend, but real is revolutionary. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to use my platform for positive change, new chances to show the world that beauty existed in forms the traditional industry had refused to acknowledge. But tonight, I was simply grateful for the journey that had brought me home to myself, into a love that celebrated rather than demanded perfection. The girl who had been abandoned because of her acne was gone forever. In her place was a woman who had learned that sometimes the cruelest lessons lead to the most beautiful transformations, and that the scars we try to hide often become the sources of our greatest strength. Connor Williams had taught me one final, unintentional lesson: that being rejected by someone who only valued surfaces was actually a gift in disguise, freeing me to find someone who could see beauty in depths he had never bothered to explore. And as I turned off the lights and headed toward my new life, I couldn't help but think that the woman in the mirror, scarred, real, and finally, completely free, was the most beautiful version of myself I had ever been. Thanks for listening to this powerful story. Subscribe for more stories about the surprising ways people change our lives for the better. See you in the next story.